We have a shot spotter activation. Single gunshot detected. There's your location. Send a team.
Poacher spotted.
Thank you very much, Aaron, for inviting us. It's always a pleasure to chat to like-minded people about, I suppose, an issue that we become deeply passionate about. And I will confess that since we've been involved in this project since 2013, rhino conservation is more than just a technological project for us. It becomes an obsession, and I think anybody involved in rhino conservation and anti-poaching can attest to the fact as to how it gets under your skin when you've had the displeasure of actually seeing what happens to these animals, and in many cases when they're not yet dead, you feel like you just have to do something. And I'll start off with a quote by a fellow called Edmund Burke, who you may know, but he had a great quote which said, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." And we felt compelled as an organization and as people to apply our minds to this problem and hopefully bring some technological advantages to the men and the women who literally break their backs every single day to protect the species from extinction. And it truly is a privilege for us to be involved in this project. And we've met probably the most amazing people I've ever had the pleasure of working with. And I mean that sincerely. So yeah, having said that as an introduction, I'll give you a brief introduction to the company and the technology and our role in that. So I'm the chief executive of a company called Beyond Wireless. And we really apply which you've probably heard the acronym. It's the Internet of Things, which is the ability to use the cell phone networks and technology to remotely monitor assets and equipment all around the world. Currently, we operate in 74 countries, predominantly working in the healthcare sector with the likes of UNICEF, the Red Cross, and the WHO. But we've become particularly good at making technology work in particularly difficult places. So the background and the story to ShotSpotter is back in 2013. My team and I, we on a monthly basis get around the table and we ask ourselves the question: how can we apply technology to solve difficult problems, and what problems are there that need solving? And the issue of rhino poaching, obviously, as a South African, it's been top of our mind. Certainly, those who are involved in the conservation sector for a long time. And one of the guys stood up and said, "Well," and I suppose this is the link to acoustics. He said, "Well, what if we could hear the shot?" And it was an intriguing idea. And as a team of engineers, we said, "Well, I'm sure we could build something like that." And then I said, "Well, before we build something like that, let's rather Google it." So we Googled gunshot detection, and up popped the name ShotSpotter. And I immediately got on the phone and I called the CEO of ShotSpotter, who's based in Silicon Valley in the US. His name is Ralph Clark. And I said to Ralph, we have this issue with rhino poaching. And at that stage, the ShotSpotter technology, which has been around for just over 2 decades, had primarily been developed and utilized in an urban gunfire environment. So the technology is used to detect urban gunfire, and in South Africa, we also have the technology deployed in the Cape Flats. So in Hanover Park and Manenberg, which are areas typically noted for gang violence and gang-related violence, and we've also more recently deployed it in the suburb of Helenvale, in Port Elizabeth. But those are both urban environment, or all urban environments. And the question we had to ask ourselves is, can we make this technology work in the bush? Because the bush quite clearly is a very different environment to what a city is in every aspect. And the question was, could we make it work? Because obviously in a city you have power. In the bush you don't have power. And the other thing that we needed is reliable connectivity. And quite obviously in the city, you've got 3G and 4G and LTE and various other things. And in the bush, you don't necessarily have the luxury of reliable and stable and high-speed communications. Nonetheless, Ralph Clark, who's become a very good and close friend of mine since we started this in 2013, he very graciously said, well, I tell you what, Ian, I'm going to send you 10 sensors. And if you can make it work in the bush, well, maybe we've got something that we could talk about. So the 10 sensors arrived, and the first thing we had to do was to get the sensors to operate in the bush. So we had to solve the issue of power. Fortunately, in South Africa, we're blessed with very good sunshine for the vast majority of the time. So that was a relatively easy issue to solve. And we had to also solve the issue of connectivity. And again, GSM connectivity is fairly ubiquitous, and particularly in the Kruger, where you have a lot of tourist activity. So cell phone connectivity was available to us. We tested the technology back in 2013, really developing what we described as a technical proof of concept. We have had absolutely no aspirations of any sort of operational success. We were there to see if it would work. And very interestingly, not only did the technology work technologically, in fact, what we did is we fired, well, let me just explain quickly how the technology works. So a gunshot is very much like a pebble being dropped in a pond. So as the weapon is fired, the acoustic wave travels outwards from the center, as I said, very much like the ripples traveling through the ponds when you drop a pebble in. As that impulsive noise, the boom, the pop, or the bang that is generated by that firearm arrives at each one of the sensors, we are able to date and timestamp the arrival of that sensor. And because the sensors are all placed in a slightly different location, the time of arrival is slightly different at each one of the sensors. That difference in the time of arrival allows us to calculate distance. And basic high school mathematics, distance from 3 or more points is effectively a dot on the map. So we were able to prove that the technology was able to reliably and accurately detect gunfire. We then had to ask ourselves the question, well, what kind of gunfire will it detect? And of course, when poachers are poaching rhinos, they typically use very heavy caliber weapons, 375, 458. But we went through literally an exhaustive exercise of firing multiple caliber of weapon, all the way from 223 up to 458, both suppressed and unsuppressed weapons, because poachers are known to use suppressors, or what you might refer to as silencers. Of course, it's very difficult to silence a heavy caliber weapon. And what we proved to ourselves during that technical proof of concept is that not only could we detect gunfire, but we could detect it at far greater ranges and with higher degree of accuracy than we were able to do in the traditional urban environment that ShotSpotter was designed to operate in. And in retrospect, it made sense in the sense that the bush, by its nature, is a lot quieter than a typical urban environment. You don't have the same noises that you would have associated with human activity, cars, aircraft, construction work, and the likes. And of course, the bush has the other advantage of having no hard objects in the way, like tall buildings, roads, and other hard things that are going to bounce and refract and bend sound around. So we were able to prove that with a very high degree of reliability and accuracy, we were able to detect and locate gunfire. Very interestingly, during the technical proof of concept, and I remember the incident extremely well. It was on the 9th of April in 2014. I was sitting at home in Joburg. We had conducted all of our tests, and I got a message on my phone because the alerts come through via SMS and on the app, and a shot had been fired at 8:30 at night inside our test array, which was not known as a hotspot at that stage. And to cut a very long story short, with absolutely no intention of ever catching a poacher, we actually caught 2 of them at that particular incident. And I think that got everybody to sit up straight in the sense that not only were we able to prove to ourselves and to our partners, both in the Kruger and in the US, that we were able to technically detect and locate gunfire, but we were also able to turn that into operational success with an arrest. And in that case, it happened to be 2 poachers who were caught as a result of that particular incident. So to fast forward, like all projects, there is a requirement for money. So we then had to go out and seek some funding. And again, to cut a very long story short, we were able to secure a donation from some philanthropists in the US. And that allowed us to expand the technology to where it is today, and I can't tell you where or how much, but nonetheless, we have a fairly significant deployment inside the Kruger National Park, which has been operating there for just short of 2 years. And we've had a fairly successful time during that period. Where not only have we been successful in arresting poachers, but I think more importantly than that, what we've proven is that, and this is one of the criticisms of ShotSpotter, certainly in the early days, what they said was that once the shot has been fired, it's probably too late because an animal has died. And while we accept that to be the reality, we also know that there is nothing more powerful in terms of a deterrent than an effective response. Because what we know from rhino poaching, and I think Debbie will attest to this, is that the vast majority of gunshots go undetected, and in many cases you find a carcass which is hours or days or sometimes even weeks old, and the poacher has already gone home, sold his product, and may have already come back a few times to get some more rhino horn in the interim. So the ability to detect and locate gunfire within a short period of time and to give an accurate location means that rangers and anti-poaching authorities are able to respond with greater speed and greater accuracy than ever made possible before. And as a result of that effective response, and we've certainly seen this, is able to drive reductions in the number of animals killed inside our coverage area, because we believe that while the poachers may not know exactly what is resulting in the enhanced and improved response, they are certainly aware of it. And we notice that they now appear to be deliberately avoiding the area as a result of the technology. So I'm just going to pull up a very quick slide here just to explain how it works. Again, I promise I'm not going to bore you with any PowerPoint, but in essence, just to explain how the software works. That I suppose is a pitiful depiction of the bush, but nonetheless, you've got the bush, and in the bush you have lots of trees, and of course the trees suit us in that they give us the opportunity to mount the sensors. So quite literally what we did is we gave the trees ears and allowed them to listen to what was happening in that environment. Now ShotSpotter specifically listens for what we call impulsive noises, so booms, pops, and bangs. So you have rhino living in this area, and when a poacher fires that weapon, that acoustic wave travels outwards. It arrives at each one of the sensors. As I said earlier, we're able to date and timestamp the arrival of that boom, bang, or pop. And the difference in the time of arrival allows us to calculate distance, and distance from 3 or more points is a dot in a map. The sensors then upload that information via the cell phone network, which then lands up on the servers. The servers run the algorithm to calculate the location and then to give a weighting in terms of to what extent does this noise actually sound like gunfire. Of course, having the heavy caliber weapons that we have in the Kruger, are you guys able to see my screen?
No, we're not. Sorry.
My apologies. Sorry. Okay, so I'm just going to have to rewind that. Let me just share my screen then. My humble apologies. Okay, there we go. There
we go. Perfect.
Okay, great. So let me just go back then. Okay, so there's the bush. Sensors in the trees. Yeah, rhinos living in the bush, and of course a poacher fires that weapon. Acoustic wave travels outwards from the center. We transmit that information via the local cell phone network onto our servers, which essentially calculate the location through a form of triangulation. But then we still have to go through what we call the review process. Now, as good as computers are and artificial intelligence and machine learning, etc., we are yet to perfect a machine quite as amazing as the human brain. And in the review center, we have trained acoustic experts who quite literally have listened to tens of thousands of rounds of gunfire, and they verify what the computers say is likely to be a shot. Very interestingly, in the Kruger, and we only picked this up afterwards, is that elephants feeding, in other words, breaking and pushing over trees and snapping branches, often to both the human ear and to our system, can sometimes sound like gunfire. And I think anybody who's been involved in anti-poaching and has ever heard elephants breaking trees, rangers are often fooled by that and think it might be a shot that's been fired. But nonetheless, through the machine learning algorithms, we were able to filter those out. Yeah, and every now and then we get a false positive, but nonetheless, the human ear is responsible for verifying whether or not that noise is in fact a gunshot. Once we have that, the system then publishes that information to what we call the alerts console, which sits in a control room. The operator sitting in front of that screen will then relay the coordinates of that shot directly to the rangers, and at the same time, we send out an SMS alert as well as an app alert, which provides the latitude and longitude of that shot. The responding rangers are also able to listen to the sound of that shot, because that provides additional situational awareness, which is sometimes useful. And although it has never happened in the Kruger, but certainly in an urban environment, if a law enforcement officer were to hear, for example, multiple shooters or automatic gunfire, that would certainly dictate a different response to what you would do if you had a single gunshot with a single shooter. As I said, that has certainly never happened in the Kruger. Most shots or incidents are typically a single shot, maybe a second one or a third one if they don't kill the animal with the first shot. But nonetheless, it's typically bolt-action rifle fire out of high-caliber weapons with a relatively low cadence. That information and the speed with which it gets relayed to the responding rangers and or law enforcement officers, the whole transaction, and I call it a transaction, but the transaction from the moment the trigger is pulled and the weapon is fired to the point where that information arrives on the handset of a responding ranger, that entire transaction takes between 30 and 45 seconds. So that means within 30 to 45 seconds, we have the exact location of the incident, and that, for obvious reasons, radically improves the probability of actually catching the bad guys red-handed. So yeah, and then you have your response, quite obviously, and that allows us to then hopefully interdict the poachers. So what I'm now going to show you, and then we can get into some questions if you have any. Again, I'm not going to zoom back or show you anything that I shouldn't, but essentially this is one of the incidents that we are most proud of in the Kruger. This happened in February of 2019, in the early days of our deployment. We had a shot that occurred at 15 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, which is quite unusual because most poachers tend to wait to last light. This particular incident, we got the location, and it just so happened that we already had helicopters in the air, and within 17 minutes of the shot being fired, we actually had these poachers in handcuffs. And it wasn't just any old poacher. It turned out to be one of the Kruger's most wanted and prolific poachers, a fellow who had been on their wanted list for a very long time, and he literally got caught red-handed, and is subsequently now awaiting trial. So the good news is that in the 18 or so months that we've been active in this particular area, we've had, I think, in the region now of 9 arrests, but more encouragingly, and this is truthfully the thing that we're after, we've actually noted a 60% reduction in the number of rhino carcasses inside that coverage area year on year since the deployment of the technology. And what we can only put that down to, just by virtue of the fact of the number of rhino that live in this particular location, it is a treasure trove from a gene pool perspective. But what we are putting it down to is that the bush telegraph works, and we think and we know that poachers have probably gotten wind of the fact that something, whether they know it specifically or not, but something has changed, and as a result of that, they seem to be staying away. And that for us has been probably the most successful thing of this project, is not that we catch bad guys, but that bad guys no longer come to the areas where these animals live. So so that I suppose in a brief way sums up what we do. And if you guys have any questions, I will just quickly play you. I'm not sure if you can hear the audio, but apart from the location, and I won't zoom out, there's actually the shot. I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but that is the impulsive noise that would obviously tell us that is a gunshot. And if we zoomed in, literally, and this is quite important as well, we use satellite imagery. Now, this doesn't particularly help you, I guess, but if you can see it, even the ability to spot landmarks. So we can see 2 large marula trees on the left-hand side there, and I'm able to actually walk the rangers in by using these tools. So I can say, as an example, 80 meters, 262 foot from the large marula tree northeast or northwest of the spot. And rangers who've been involved in these responses, and you can take it from them. You can speak to Don English, and anybody involved in this this conservation area will know exactly who Don English is. He's the Numzan of the Kruger. He can tell you about an incident where we gave him a location, and he literally went and stood on the bullet case. that gives you an idea of the accuracy that we're able to achieve with this acoustic technology.
Wow.
So,
Ian,
yeah.
We weren't able to see your thing earlier. If you could just share the right thing.
Sorry, let me help you with that. So let me just get back to that. I'll say stop sharing, and let me share again. Sorry.
No, don't worry about it.
There we go. So I'll put that back up. Yeah, so there is the shot. And I'll just sort of clear this. So, so this is an actual incident. As I said, this is the one that resulted in the arrest of an extremely high-profile poacher. And there you can see, just take that off. I'll zoom back slightly without giving away the system's location for obvious security reasons. But nonetheless, as I zoom in, you can sort of see a little marula tree there. And if we were directing a poacher onto the scene, aside from the fact that he has the exact latitude and longitude, which they can plug into their GPS, we can actually walk them in from landmarks in the particular area, so they can literally go and stand on the bullet case. And the idea here is that, as much as you might find a carcass at that particular location, the carcass we refer to as the poo. If you can find the poo being the point of origin, that gives you the starting point. And from there, you're able to initiate the appropriate follow-up to be able to intercept and interdict these poachers. So I think that that probably sums up what it is that we do. So I'm now happy to answer any questions if there are any.